Every summer, thousands of holidaymakers flock here to the British seaside to enjoy the warm weather, the pebble beaches and the amusement arcades. But there's another side to these shores, a sinister underbelly of violence and murder, where sins are washed away in the tide and where the seafront is stalked by sadistic killers who, like the ocean itself, have no respect for human life. My name's Dr. Nell Darby. I've written extensively about the history of crime, researching the reasons why people kill. Over the course of my career, I've developed a keen eye for spotting trends in a killer's behaviour. Nowhere are these trends more striking than in the not-so-sunny seaside towns of Britain's coastline, which have always seemed to attract an extraordinarily high number of murderous rogues. In this new series of Murder by the Sea, join me on a journey to the cliff's edge, where the land meets the sea, and where life meets death. For at first glance, our seaside towns are all fun fairs, candy floss, breezy promenades. But when the carousel stops turning and the lights along the shorefront go out, there emerges from the darkness an underworld of murder and mayhem. In today's episode of Murder by the Sea, we're heading to Jersey, where two brothers from a nice middle-class family allowed years of resentment to boil over one night in 1987. It resulted in a barbarous bonanza of patricide and matricide, a grisly reminder that although blood may be thicker than water, it can still be spilt with shocking ease and brutality. Roderick and Mark Newell were two brothers in their early 20s. They were the children of Nicholas and Elizabeth, who were a Scottish couple originally from the Glasgow area. They had retired and Nicholas had invested his money wisely and was able to retire to Jersey. The couple also had a property in Spain. They were able to buy a yacht. So on the surface of things, this was a nice, secure family, financially stable, to exterior purposes, very happy. Double parricide, the killing of both parents, is extremely rare. And with a 7-year plot full of simmering resentment, covert recordings, and a manhunt that spanned the planet, there are lots of things that make the case of the Newell brothers one of the most remarkable in British legal history.
The Newell family were actually very, very wealthy. They travelled a lot, and they kind of apparently had stumbled upon Jersey whilst they were wanting to travel and find somewhere to set down roots. So I think they lived quite a sort of adventurous lifestyle. They were very kind of outgoing, very well known, and so they were very wealthy and lived quite a prestigious lifestyle on a also very wealthy island. So they were very kind of well known, very well liked, and there was nothing necessary to suggest that there was any real problems in the family as such that would indicate that this kind of crime would occur.
But bitterness was bubbling beneath the surface. For as Nicholas and Elizabeth used their fortune to pursue this lavish lifestyle, their two sons, Roderick and Mark, fell by the wayside.
Mark and Roderick were two sons of very successful parents who were very wealthy. They were former teachers, but they both inherited money from their families, and they lived the millionaire lifestyle. They lived it so well that they basically didn't take any interest in the kids. They had a nanny with the boys while they were young, and then they were shipped off to boarding school. Very expensive boarding schools, but boarding schools. And we hear accounts of when they were at Christmas and they weren't with the parents at Christmas the parents were gallivanting around Europe or around Spain, and they were at home having to open drawers to find the Christmas presents. This is a classic case of where the parents basically deprive the children of the love and attention that they deserve. Every child should be brought up in a home where there's love and attention and support and encouragement, and they clearly didn't have that. So they were deprived by their affluent parents. Their parents basically didn't take responsibility. They decided they were going to have the high life, enjoy themselves, and they did. And I think quite clearly they didn't look after their children. Now, had they been very poor, no doubt the social services would have taken the children into care. So what does that do to the children? It makes the two boys angry and annoyed and deprived of love. The things that they should get, unconditional love from their parents, they didn't get that.
After school, Roderick joined the army. He went to Sandhurst, he trained and became an officer in the Royal Green Jackets. Mark went into banking on the island, on Jersey, and became a very successful trader on the international money markets. The parents, Nicholas and Elizabeth, meanwhile, were spending money like sailors on shore leave. Money flowed out of that family on good food, on good wine, on holidays. There was nothing that the Newells spared themselves. It was really a hedonistic, sybaritic, lotus-eating lifestyle that Nicholas and Elizabeth enjoyed. And the boys, Roderick and Mark, looked at that and resented it, and they already resented their parents for neglecting them. But on top of that, they began to worry that their inheritance, the money that would come to them when Nicholas and Elizabeth died, was being frittered away. It wasn't just being frittered away, it was being poured away. And they became worried that they would inherit nothing.
The first signs that Roderick's resentment was boiling over came after he approached his mother for financial help.
He asked his mother, would she settle his bar bill? He built up a substantial bar bill entertaining while he was in the army, and he needed to settle that. She's got loads of money, he wants some with it, she says no. He hits her. He hits her in the face, he attacks her, he's so angry that she will not help him out. It meant nothing to her as far as he was concerned. Money didn't mean much to her when you got millions, but to him it meant a lot.
Now, children punching their mother, toddlers do it. Very small children will occasionally do that, but we grow out of that. We learn as children and as we become adolescents that it's a no-no. You don't hit your parents. That Roderick, a young man, an army lieutenant in his 20s, was able and willing to punch his mother shows that he was beginning to come apart, that his mind, his anger was so extreme that he was fracturing.
This shows a certain personality type coming forward, an inability to accept a refusal to help, and a demand for things to be given to Roderick immediately. He didn't want to wait for anything, he wanted it now.
Nicholas and Elizabeth had used their inherited money to invest in the Lloyd's of London insurance market, becoming what is known as Lloyd's names. When the economy was strong, the Newells saw a considerable return on their investment.
Mark has become a really successful trader on the money markets. He's not just based on Jersey now, he has a place in London as well. And he's become very good at this. He's a very, very bright young man. And in the mid-1980s, around 1986, he can spot rough financial headwinds approaching. And he warns his parents that this is coming. And he says, rein in your spending. But above all, pull out, get out of the Lloyd's syndicate. Stop being a name. Because if things go bad, and I think they're going to, you are going to be hit with a huge bill. In 1987, that financial crash came about. Lloyd's suffered huge losses, and the names, Nicholas and Elizabeth among them, were called on to make up the loss. And in the Newells case, that meant a bill of around £1 million. That would have wiped out the entire family fortune.
There is no way that Nicholas and Elizabeth can afford to pay off their debt, and it won't be cleared until their deaths.
In 1987, you've got two young men, Roderick and Mark, incredibly angry at their parents for all the neglect that they had endured as children, and because in their minds, their parents are spending the inheritance which should come to them and are now facing the total loss of all the family money. That is a recipe for disaster.
The brothers had come home because it was their mother's birthday. Elizabeth was celebrating her 48th birthday, and they were all going out for dinner as a family to a local restaurant. So on the face of it, again, there's this image of a happy family event.
After arriving on Jersey, Roderick hires a van, drives to a hardware store and purchases shovels, a pickaxe and tarpaulins before going home to get ready for his mother's birthday meal.
It's a very lavish, expensive meal. Mark is the designated driver, so he's not drinking. But between the others, between the three of them, Elizabeth, Nicholas and Roderick, they get through several bottles of wine and champagne and have a truly lavish meal. Mark picks up the bill. He pays for everything. He then drives Roderick back to the family house and goes to his own house on Jersey to spend the night. It's now after midnight. Elizabeth is tired. She decides she's going to go to bed. Nicholas and Roderick decide they'll have a nightcap, and they stay up drinking fine scotch. Soon they begin arguing, and what do they argue about? Money. The way Nicholas and Elizabeth are spending the boy's inheritance. The row becomes aggressive and then violent. Nicholas pushes Roderick over, and he comes up swinging. He grabs the nearest thing he can find as a weapon, which happens to be a nunchuk, a Japanese martial arts equipment, which he'd used as a teenager in his martial arts training. He grabs this and he beats his father to death.
Clearly, he was going to kill the parents. He'd got all the equipment. Whether he planned to kill them that night, or as I suspect he didn't, I suspect that was an impulsive thing that just happened. The explosive feelings. We may have somebody who's over-controlled his emotions, and then suddenly they explode. And we know that drink disinhibits people, makes them more violent and more prone to violence. So quite clearly they had a lot to drink that night. He goes back to the house, they have some more alcohol. He's drunk, he's disinhibited, he's angry, bang, explosion, kills father.
He then beats his mother to death with the same nunchuk which is already covered in his father's blood. then picks up the phone and dials the number of the one person he knows he can trust to help him. He rings Mark and says, "I've killed our parents. Come and help me. Come and help me get rid of the bodies and clean up. If you don't, I'm going to kill myself here and now."
Roderick is gambling that rather than call the police, his younger brother will instead rush to his aid. This may seem like a risky move, but the fact that he did it speaks volumes about the nature of the brothers' relationship.
I think that they are birds of a different kidney, in that one is the leader, who is very pure form psychopathic, and the other, as in Mark, is not psychopathic, but under the spell or in thrall to his older brother. Roderick totally conforms to psychopath, totally fits the profile of a power assertive criminal, and undoubtedly, in my opinion, had premeditated intent to kill the parents that evening so that he could inherit money.
Having received Roderick's call for help, Mark decides not to phone the police. Instead, he gets into the van, loaded with the equipment that his brother bought earlier that day, and drives to his parents' home, where Roderick is cleaning up the crime scene. Next, they have to dispose of the bodies.
The difficulty with disposing of a body, first you need to know where you're going to do it. Well, you can plan that. If you've planned that you're going to kill someone, probably you'll have taken that into account in advance. So I suspect he knew where he was going to dispose. But in order to do that, one, you've got to make sure no one's going to see you do it. And also you don't want to leave any trace behind. So if there's any drag marks, maybe where you're, because it's a dead weight, literally it is a dead weight, really heavy. He had bought some tarpaulins from the hardware shop, so he and Mark together were able to wrap the bodies in the tarpaulins, so they're now movable, and they can then transport them to where they need to dispose of them.
He had experience in the army of planning things and of obviously thinking about killing in the normal duty of an officer. He tackled the parents' death very similar in the way that he got the equipment he needed. He was also incredibly successful in burying the body. Most people don't know how to bury a body. They bury it under 18 inches, and eventually wild animal life will dig it up, and that's how you find the bodies. If you bury it about 4 or 5 feet deep, there is no way anybody is going to find that body unless you tell them where it is.
It's quite significant that they dug such a deep grave. Quite often bodies in such circumstances are buried in fairly shallow graves, but they really didn't want them to be found. So they've buried them in an area that's unlikely to be recognised, unlikely to happen upon bodies there. But if it did, if there were going to be some building work, etc. going on there, they were deep enough that unlikely that they would have been found in those instances.
But rather than a random secluded spot, the brothers choose to bury their parents in a place of deep family significance.
They chose a location near where they previously lived, in the house, near to the house where they previously had grown up. Interestingly, a house that the parents had sold and downsized to the bungalow where they were subsequently killed. So there's probably something symbolic there. You know, I think the motivation underlying this crime, which was in one respect financial gain ultimately, but I think it was more than that, and I think the locations that they selected show that. I think it was about punishment in a way for some sort of aggrievement in the past. I think they were punishing ultimately, in the ultimate way, punishing their parents and rubbing their noses in it.
They dig a grave deep enough to bury their mother and their father. They tip them in, cover it up, tamp it down. They go somewhere else to burn their parents' personal effects. acts, including, and this is always catches me, and it's poignant, they burn their father's glasses. Then they go back to the bungalow and begin clearing it up.
This sounds like quite a frenzied attack, really. Hitting somebody on the head with a sharp instrument. There is going to be a lot of blood going on. Roderick's clothing would also have blood on it, so that would need to be disposed of. But the room itself, I would imagine we might have, depending on the size of the room, blood up the walls, on the furniture, on the carpet, the flooring, so that would all need to be cleaned up. And the difficulty with it is what perhaps would look clean to you may not actually be clean under the scrutiny of the various resources available to crime scene examiners that they would be able to use that would actually show that the blood was there.
It's a big clean-up operation, but they do it. They clean all the walls down. They scrub the carpets. That means there's water everywhere. It's wet, it feels wet, it smells wet. So they crank up the heating to try and dry the bungalow out. And then they go back to Mark's house, a few miles away, sleep for a couple of hours, and then fly out of Jersey back to England that morning.
Roderick and Mark had both gone back to London. As far as they were concerned, nobody knew what had happened to their parents. However, this was a small community where the Newells had friends. They became not suspicious, but concerned that they hadn't heard from them. They then contacted the brothers and said, we're concerned, the car's still on the drive, but we haven't heard from your parents at all. And it's only at this point, a week later, that the brothers have to return to Jersey and report their parents missing.
The police visit the Newells' home, but there's no sign of Nicholas and Elizabeth. They also notice that the heating has been left on, so they decide to speak to Roderick and Mark.
That's where the police get their first sense that something's wrong. It's standard procedure that you interview witnesses or suspects separately. When the detectives sat down with Mark to interview him, Roderick kept bursting in. Twice he burst into the room, demanded to know what Mark was saying and demanded to be present. Now, that on its own is very, very strange.
Suspecting foul play, the police call in the Home Office forensic team.
Once the scenes of crime officers attended the scene, they will have used various resources to discover and to find out that actually what had taken place. And they did find traces of blood from both parents on that carpet.
The police tell Roderick and Mark that their parents have most likely been murdered. But they seem unaffected by the news. So the police decide to dig deeper into the brothers' testimony.
The more the police looked at Roderick and Mark's story, the more it didn't quite fit. The overall architecture of the story matched, but look at the detail and the statements didn't match. For example, Roderick said that Mark slept in the bed and he, Roderick, slept on cushions. Mark had the story completely reversed. It was Roderick who was in the bed and Mark on the cushions. There were numerous instances of tiny details like that which didn't match. Everything pointed to Roderick and Mark Newell having killed or been involved in the killing of their parents. But that wasn't enough.
The boys appeared to have no reason to kill their parents, but nor did anybody else. So in that case, what do? You have no bodies, you have no real reason to believe that this couple are dead, and no real reason to suspect their children of involvement in any disappearance. So the police are left struggling. All they had to go on was the fact that Roderick was unusually calm and collected in reporting his parents missing, and that's not enough to charge someone with anything.
years after Nicholas and Elizabeth disappeared, Roderick and Mark returned to Jersey to register their parents' death. This means the debt can be wiped, and they can claim their inheritance of £1 million.
The boys eventually, after their parents are declared dead, inherit their estate. Roderick uses this to kind of get a boat, go sailing, kind of live the life of kind of a very affluent young man who doesn't need to work. You could argue, though, that his desire to have this boat and go sailing is also an attempt to kind of escape what's happened. If you look below the surface, is he trying to escape his life? Is he trying to escape kind of home by taking this boat and sailing as far as he can? Now, at one point he ends up in South America, in Brazil. He meets a girl, he starts a relationship with her. But as with so many people who have killed, he has this desire to confess to what he's done. He can't keep it to himself. Now, whether he wants to do this because he wants to show off about it or whether it's just for a cathartic reason, he needs to get it off his chest. He hints to his girlfriend that he knows what's happened to his parents. Now, it's significant that he says, the police don't know, but I know, because this hints at, I'm cleverer than the police, because I know what's happened and I've got away with it. They don't know.
Killing leaves a mark on the mind. No one normal kills and forgets about it. It leaves a mark. And for Roderick, it was particularly, obviously, playing on his mind and causing him problems. When he gets back to England, he goes to visit his aunt, who'd been a central figure in the boy's life while the parents were off jetting around the world. And over dinner one night, he lets slip, probably deliberately, possibly subconsciously, that he knows something about Nicholas and Elizabeth's disappearance. He says then he's going off to visit his uncle who lives in Scotland. Roderick's aunt is sufficiently worried by what he said that she calls the police. And he gets routed through to Jersey, and Jersey police once again reopen the case. This time, though, they decide they're going to get cast iron evidence against Roderick.
Stephen Newell was Nicholas's twin brother. Ahead of Roderick's visit to Scotland, the police contact Stephen and arrange for him to meet Roderick in a hotel room bugged with secret recording equipment. Anything Roderick tells his uncle will be captured on tape.
And they wait as the conversation drags on without Roderick saying anything incriminating. Finally, his uncle said, "Look, your aunt called me and told me what you said." And at that point, Roderick admits to his uncle that he knows where Nicholas and Elizabeth, his parents, are buried.
Roderick is taking a big risk confessing to his uncle, perhaps indicating that his composure is crumbling under stress. Or is Roderick simply displaying the same lack of empathy that allowed him to commit the murder in the first place?
Now, you would think that Roderick would realise that having entrusted his brother with what he'd done, having got his brother to help him dispose of the body, so there's this real closeness between them, he would realise that perhaps his father and his father's twin brother would also have a closeness, and doesn't realise that actually his uncle's priorities might be in finding out what happened to his own brother. So there's this failure to kind of negotiate family relationships, to kind of read between the lines, to try and work out who you can trust and who you might not be able to trust. And I think that's interesting that he doesn't realise that he genuinely thinks he can trust his uncle with this secret, even when that secret involves the uncle's own brother.
The Jersey police think they have the evidence they need to arrest Roderick. But there's a problem. They don't have jurisdiction in Scotland.
The police decide they will have to follow him back to England, and they put out 4 or 5 cars to tail him on the journey back. Halfway back, Roderick spots them. He's been trained in anti-surveillance techniques during his time in the army. He knows when he's being tailed. And he uses a technique that he would have been taught in the army, something called dry cleaning. And that's speeding up to 100 miles an hour and then slowing down. And that way, any car tailing him becomes very visible. And sure enough, he spots the Jersey police cars following him. His anti-surveillance training paid off. Roderick was able to give the police the slip. He makes it back to the coast, catches a ferry to France, and then he's off on his yacht, off on the high seas. Once again, Roderick Newell has slipped through the police's fingers.
Roderick's disappearance sparks an international manhunt. Interpol are informed. The police hire a commercial yacht tracing service, and an RAF Nimrod is scrambled to track him down. Eventually, his yacht is spotted in Gibraltar. When he leaves port, a Royal Navy frigate is hot on his tail.
For 2 days, there's a chase on the high seas. In full view of the television cameras, HMS Argonaut chases Roderick Newell's yacht, and finally they catch him 150 miles south of Gibraltar, trick him on board the frigate and bring him back to Gibraltar, where he's arrested. And Jersey police think, now we've got him.
Having caught their man, the police are ready to put their evidence before a judge in Gibraltar. However, they suffer a major setback when the court rules that the secret tape recordings are inadmissible. Their only hope now is to get Roderick extradited back to the UK.
But again, he doesn't take responsibility for what he's done. He actually fights the extradition. And it's 14 months of legal fights with his brother, yet again, helping. Mark ends up funding the legal case and things like that. So they're not taking responsibility. He's quite cool, quite psychopathic in many ways in what he's done.
Finally, the police get the breakthrough they need. They track down Roderick's Brazilian girlfriend, who reveals under questioning that he had also confessed to the murder to her.
He chose to confess to his girlfriend that he had done it. And you might think, well, why on earth would anybody do that if he's going to be that psychopathic? Well, then we bring on power assertiveness. And it's not enough for them to know that they have done it. He doesn't want it to just be about him. He wants other people to know about it. The power, I cannot stress this strongly enough, the arrogance of this Roderick boy, power that he got from doing that, he can't just let it rest there. Others must know about it.
The police now have the evidence they need, and the court agrees to Roderick's extradition back to Jersey. And though this consideration doesn't seem to bother Roderick, the fallout of his confession may have serious implications for the one person whose loyalty he relied upon.
One of the people is likely to react in a very, very different way. So some of them may, for example, start to talk about things or start to become more and more distressed about whether they might get found out, what might happen to them if they get found out. And then the ultimate kind of betrayal that obviously is at the back of everyone's minds, whether you're brothers or sisters or just friends or whoever it might be. If you've entered into this criminal enterprise, this joint criminal enterprise, is that sometime you might get betrayed.
The brothers were very close and they had committed this crime together. Now, Mark had claimed that he only helped his brother because he was scared he was going to kill himself otherwise, which shows something of the loyalty he had towards his brother, that he wanted him to live even if it meant kind of burying his own parents. So you have this closeness between them, and they've kept this secret for years of what they've done. They've continued to be close after the murder. You know, in a lot of cases you'd find that the parties went their own ways because they couldn't bear to be with each other anymore. Not in the case of these two. They remain close. They remain having this secret between them. So when Mark's brought in by the police and they tell him his brother's confessed, You can understand his disbelief, like, no, of course he wouldn't, because he's kept this secret for so long. Why would he suddenly tell people what's happened? Being played the tape of his brother confessing must have been awful for him. You know, this sudden realisation that, oh my God, he really has told somebody. After all this time, he's confessed to this crime that implicates me. And not only that, he's done it to a member of our own family. Why has he done this? How could he have done this?
In 1994, the brothers appear before the Crown Court in Jersey, where the press have assembled to cover the final moments of this infamous saga. The photos they capture only serve to highlight the difference between Roderick and Mark.
The photos taken by the press when the brothers were going to court are very striking because of their difference, actually. Obviously, the brothers look different, you would expect that. But you have Roderick, who was reported as being this very good-looking young man, and he's very defiant, actually. He's looking the press in the eye, he's looking the photographers in the eye, almost as though, like, yeah, so what? The photos of him actually don't present him in a very positive light because he seems so defiant and confident. This contrasts with the pictures of his younger brother, Mark, who is bespectacled, kind of not as good looking as his brother, not as obviously good looking, but also he's looking at the floor. He doesn't look at the photographers in the eye. He gives more of a sense of being almost embarrassed by what's happening, by the fact that he's being brought to court. He's avoiding that contact. So the photographs of them show two very different personalities.
Before the case goes to trial, Roderick agrees to show the police where they buried Nicholas and Elizabeth. Does this suggest he's finally showing some remorse for his actions?
He was caught, it was clear that he was going to go to prison, so he obviously, I suspect, decided to tell them where the bodies were so that he could reduce his sentence. I think it was quite calculated what he did. I don't think it was out of remorse. I suspect it was much more out of looking at the situation realistically and seeing damage limitation.
It was quite some years later when they actually took police to the place where these bodies had been disposed of and buried. And they had been so tightly wrapped up in that tarpaulin that it had protected them. The clothing was still very much intact. The father's still in his dinner jacket. And the bodies were almost mummified. They desiccated so much, but it meant that all the injuries that they had incurred were still there. So because this evidence was so well preserved, it meant that the examination could take place. They could glean all the evidence from it, and from that determine exactly what had taken place, even these many years on after the actual offence took place.
Roderick claimed that the murders had been kind of an unplanned attack, the fact that they were all kind of quite drunk at the end of their evening celebrating, that his father had just kind of attacked him verbally, had kind of caused an argument, and he flipped and killed his parents. This seems unlikely, and certainly it was argued in court that it was unlikely, because the method of attack and the kind of planning that seemed to have gone into it don't point to kind of a random, kind of spontaneous attack.
Roderick's account, when questioned, was that it had been an attack carried out in an instance of rage. Roderick had claimed that he had picked up the first thing to hand, i.e. these nunchucks. Roderick's confession, in which he said he beat his parents to death with the rice flails and a drunken argument flared up, does not match the evidence. He had been to a shop in St Helier the day before the murder, and he had bought 2 trenching spades, 2 plastic tarpaulins, red heavy-duty refuse sacks, a pickaxe and upholstery cleaner. The fact that he's bought that would suggest that this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment attack, but it was very much a premeditated crime where he had bought things that he needed in advance to carry out that murder.
Both brothers are found guilty. Roderick receives a life sentence for the murders of his mother and father, while Mark is given 6 years for his part in covering up the crime. In the end, however, Mark only serves 3 years, and Roderick, after 13 years in prison, is released on parole in 2007. What happens next has been the cause of much controversy.
After their parents went missing and were declared dead, the boys inherited their parents' estate. So I believe each son would have been entitled to 50%. We know that Mark invested his portion, made quite a bit of money. At one point they said that he'd actually tripled the parents' worth to kind of 3 million. Now, Roderick, on being convicted of murder, wouldn't have been allowed to keep his parents' money. So the inheritance that he should have got, that he was initially getting when they went missing, he wouldn't have been entitled to. However, again, you get this closeness between the brothers. So Mark is allowed to have half of his parents' estate. Because he's so close to his brother, it was widely reported that he would share this money with his brother. So in effect, Roderick did profit from his parents' death, even though he wasn't legally allowed to profit from their estate. His brother helps him out, makes sure he's got the money he needs. So he's killed his parents, but he still gets the use of their money.
The idea that the boys should get money from the estate is an absolute outrage to me, and I am aware that there may be legal considerations. I am absolutely incandescent with anger that they should get money from it. It should have gone straight to the police department and the prosecution department. Is simply outrageous as far as I'm concerned. And it's a bit like saying, if you want to bump your granny off, just do a quick 12 years, and granny's got a couple of million quid, you get it ultimately anyway. It just is totally without any understanding to me as to why they should profit from killing their parents.
Nearly every aspect of this case seems beyond belief. It feels like the plot of a Hollywood movie, but it all started on a quiet island in the English Channel.
The twists and the turns in this case, it's a 7-year period that this happens across. The fact that it's a double parricide, such a rare event in British criminal history. The fact that there are chases up and down the motorways, this covert surveillance. There's a high seas chase. Now, these are not the normal warp and weft of your average murder case. This is a unique case. It's one of the highest profile murders in British criminal history, and it's not surprising that the interest in the case lingers on, because although both boys were sent to prison, it would be hard to look at this case and say justice was really done.
No matter how clever they think they are, murderers always leave a trace, and with forensic science improving by the day, the odds are always in favour of the law.
This case really does highlight how even though you plan a murder very, very well, you think you've done the perfect crime, they thought they'd cleaned up the crime scene perfectly, but they hadn't. They thought they disposed of the bodies, no one was ever going to find them. Even when they led the police to the bodies, they thought that nothing would be found, but actually it's so well preserved, the evidence was still there all those years on. So no matter what you do, you will be caught.
This case continues to kind of have repercussions because it questions our kind of assumptions about who a criminal is. what background they come from. We still have these kind of quite old prejudices about crime, about who commits crime, why they commit crime. And this case kind of confounded those because it was so atypical. They were successful young men, you know, they had a good future ahead of them. They were very intelligent. Roderick in particular was always remarked by his friends how intelligent he was, what a nice man he was. So these are boys that didn't have to resort to kill to get what they wanted. They probably would have had a very bright future anyway. It does show that you never know what's going on beneath the surface. What appears to be a happy, solvent family might have all these issues going on underneath that might one day bubble over.
Despite the notoriety of their crime, both brothers have gone on to lead normal lives and have slipped away from the public's conscience. They may be gone, but their crime is certainly not forgotten. The brothers may have hoped that they could slip back into society and their crimes be forgotten. But their heinous act of double murder continues to be remembered by the people of Jersey to this day.